Welcome to the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show. It is August the 3rd, and today we have myself, James Herrick, joined by Matt Hannafan. Matt, how's it going today?
Doing all right, man. It's already August.
Yeah, the
Where's time gone?
summer has flown by.
Way too quickly, too.
Yeah, I was enjoying my summer, and all of a sudden it's August, and I'm not necessarily happy about it, if we're being honest.
Listen, I really can't blame you if I'm being frank.
And
I
we've
love summer.
got
It's my favorite. It's my favorite time of year. So
yeah, I am dreading the Michigan winter. I'm already not excited. Um,
do you guys get a lot of snow up there?
yeah, and I live in northern Michigan too. I live like
Oh,
halfway up the mitten. It gets bad. Last couple summers haven't been bad, but if we get a bad winter, gets it gets bad.
okay.
I'm not a
Like I've
fan.
been to Minnesota over the winter, and that's brutal.
They probably get a little bit more than us, maybe quite a bit more up north, but similar on the grand scheme of things.
Gross. I don't even
It's a
want to
good
think
way to
about it.
put it. It's a good way to. It's a good. Yeah. Neither do I. We'll move on to sports, which are much funner than snow. Um, we'll keep it Detroit here with the first topic. We've had an absolute. I guess this has been kind of a crazy twist and turn here with the whole Eduardo Rodriguez to the Dodgers and him declining his no, or opting to utilize his no trade clause is a better way to phrase that. And he declines to trade to the Dodgers. And to be honest, we initially started about talking about topics last night, and I was kind of had my opinion all put in one spot, and my thoughts were a little bit more collected. Basically, the initial report was he declined for family reasons, which to me makes sense. Didn't want to move out to the West Coast for family reasons, and then this morning a report comes out that he wanted more money to move to the Dodgers. So we're kind of dealing with two different reports that are two very, very different things, in my opinion. Wanting to stay close to your family and wanting to make more money. Maybe he wanted to make more money to kind of patch that weakness and being away from the family. So there is that as well. But this has just been kind of interesting to me. And the other part of two other parts of this that I think are worth noting, that last year he took a break from the team because of family related issues. So I think now when he declines to go to the West Coast because of family related issues, it's more of those issues end up looking a lot more serious because we still don't have a lot of details, and understandably so. And then the second thing is he does have the opt out that he could have utilized as well at the end of this year. So he could have gone out to LA for 2 months and utilized that opt out and then hit the market and headed back to the East Coast. So a lot of moving pieces here. And frankly, right now, as we sit here talking about this, I'm more confused than I was last night thinking about it. But just, I guess, what are your general thoughts here with this whole Erod saga and, the Dodgers trade getting shut down?
My question is, when I first saw the report this morning about wanting more money, like how exactly would that work? Because he has a contract, and so like, are they able to restructure his contract where he's able to make more money this season in particular? Because he still has what 50 million left on his deal after the season or something along those lines, and so that's interesting to me. I think there is a lot of truth to the family. Like his family is, like, for lack of a better word, like comfortable in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that comes first for him, at least just from what we've gathered over the last year or so. And it also makes it tricky for the Dodgers because when you're trying to negotiate a trade, because it's like they were in need for a starting pitcher. But when you negotiate a trade with a player who has that opt out at the end of the season, like what are you willing to exactly forego? It's like Eduardo Rodriguez this is one of the best years he's having in his career. He has a sub-3 ERA. He's been one of the better pitchers in the American League for a team that isn't contending. And so what exactly would you negotiate for him? I don't think he was the best pitcher probably on the trade market, at least. Mm-hmm. Maybe he was one of the best pitchers. I mean, he was one of the best pitchers left available in the trade market after the fact. I mean, a couple of the other arms that weren't traded were possibly Blake Snell, who had rumors of being floated on that trade market. That would have been a little bit confusing because of the personal catcher situation. Mitch Keller for the Pirates, who is having a fairly good season so far, and he's probably one of the more coveted pitchers, even though he had, I think, 2 or 3 years left to control after the season. And so it's like Erod was up there probably in that category, but like, what exactly would you be willing to negotiate? And then, of course, the fact that he's also played with a few of these guys who were on the Dodgers. I mean, he was former teammates with Mookie Betts. He was former teammates with JD Martinez. And so, like, if he's willing to, I guess, invoke his no trade clause with those circumstances taken into account, that I think there is a lot of truth to those family rumors, because it's like, I don't think he would, because I mean, the Dodgers are the best team in the NL West. They're one of the best teams in the NL, along with the Atlanta Braves. When you want to play, I mean, Eduardo Rodriguez has played postseason baseball. He won a World Series with the Red Sox in 2018. And so it's not like he's inexperienced, and he's not like he just hates postseason baseball. I mean, again, family matters a lot too much. So I think that matters a lot. But the money thing is weird to me, because I'm not a GM, and I don't know the inner amalgamations of being a baseball GM, but like, it's not like the NBA. Like in the NBA, you're allowed to restructure contracts during the contract, even though it's funky, because it's like Miles Turner this last year, for example. He had his contract renegotiated to where his cap hit was $30+ million this year, and his cap hit was lower in the final 2 years of his contract, which made it still tradable. There is rare instances where that's applicable, but I don't really remember this happening in baseball, where it's like, okay, yeah, your adjusted salary for this year is spiked $2 million, even though, like, for whatever reason, I don't think I've ever heard of that. So maybe you're allowed to do it, maybe you're not. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but I just wonder how that would work. Like, are they going to try to tack on more money? Like, are they going to try to extend them? Is that a way that they're able to manipulate that? I mean, he already has, again, 3 years left on his deal, or whatever the case is.
Yeah,
If he doesn't invoke the opt-out.
Yeah, and like you said, it's like in the NFL too, we see contracts get reworked all the time. It's like it's very common, but in baseball, that's not a common like procedure at all. We don't see these reworkings, especially when there's a trade at hand. It's like that adds another layer of complexity, because you're working with the 6 p.m. deadline, and it's like you're under a time crunch here, and you're trying to do something that is incredibly rare and rework this contract. And I also found it interesting that, I think Dave Roberts and Friedman both said, hey, we were really surprised that this didn't come to fruition. They were both under the assumption that it was a done deal, which to me makes it even more questionable, because now we're talking about money being involved, and now we're talking about, we thought this was going to go down. So I just have a lot of questions. Like, I imagine we'll probably never get a strong answer to what exactly went down. That's kind of how this goes. But I imagine it was probably, like you said, those family issues probably, or wanting to stay close to his family rather, ended up being a major sticking point for him. And then that will also apply to, this year's free agent market, whether he decides, hey, I want to, opt into my contract, stay in Detroit for the same reason, or maybe he wants to opt out and stay on the East Coast, and maybe even go further east back to, an AL East team, a team like that. So it's like the Eduardo Rodriguez saga, I don't think is really going to end here either. I think this is probably going to carry on to the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he did step away for family reasons last season. He did miss the entire 2020 season because of myocarditis. And so that it's just very interesting to me. Like, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I think he's like 30 years old around, right? Mm-hmm. He's at least approaching that point. And it's not like 30 years old for a Major League Baseball pitcher is old, but it's just something to take into account. I mean, he has 8 years of service time pretty much. And so it's like, I wonder what he would get. I mean, again, that's not a lot. He's pretty much in his prime. But I find it interesting. I mean, maybe this does mean the Tigers will wait till next deadline or something like that to trade him, because it's like, if he's not leaving now for, again, one of the best teams in the NL, like, when exactly is he going to leave? When the money's on the table right now, like, is he going to get, again, if he opts out, he would be pretty much not throwing away, but he would have 3 years, 50 million, or at least around that mark. Is he going to get that on the free agent market? Like who? I mean, again, baseball is interesting because it doesn't have a salary cap, but then you have teams like the Guardians who just aren't willing to pay anybody. And so you have to eliminate those small market teams. And I guess the Tigers are kind of like a mid-market, small market team to an extent. And so it's like, are you going to be getting more on the free agent market? Like, is Steve Cohen going to come knocking down, being like, here's 4 for 80 or whatever the case is? Like, I don't know exactly what his market would be. So maybe it's something that they're willing to test next deadline, or even like a couple off seasons from now, if he's still under contract by then. So I just find that interesting.
He's like one injury away as well, as much as that sounds bad. But that was from what I was reading, that was one of the issues in in like trade negotiations as well. His teams are a little bit more hesitant, considering if everything goes well, he can opt out. If it goes bad, he gets injured. He has a handful of rough starts. He can then opt in, and now you're stuck paying him, 15 to 18 million over the next 3 years after he just had a disastrous 2 to 3 months with your team. So that was also a sticking point as well. And that could also affect, what the future and free agent market looks like for him. And, maybe the last couple months don't go great and he opts in and, comes back and, gives it another go next year and remains in Detroit for the next 3 years. I guess that's not, a non-possibility either.
And it also would depend on the team that he gets traded to as well. Like, I don't know if the Dodgers would be as worried. Like if he had a rough couple of starts, they wouldn't be as worried because they're the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're in one of the biggest markets in American sports. It'd be different if you got traded to like the Orioles and they aren't as willing to spend money as like the Dodgers, or like if you got traded to like the Mets or someone like that. Like I don't think it would be as bad because it's only like a $14.5 million luxury tax salary or whatever it is that they would have to pay. And so it's not the worst thing in the world if he did have like a bad couple of starts, but I guess it would just be team dependent. Like again, the Dodgers in this case are like the example because he almost got traded there. But I don't think Andrew Friedman would be that worried about paying him for. Maybe they are. Maybe they would be worried. Maybe they're over a certain luxury tax threshold that they wouldn't want to be over for a player who's not as good, but it's a movable contract. I don't think they'd be that worried about it if that were the case. But again, it's just for baseball, it's just about like the team willing to pay instead of like the entire league. Cause it's just, there's no salary floor. There's no salary cap. There's teams all over the place. It's a weird sport and weird how this stuff works, but I'm just interested to see how this goes moving forward. And I mean, I don't think he's going to regress. I mean, the numbers suggest that he's right around where he's at. I mean, I'm looking at his numbers right now, 7.5, 2.96 ERA, 3.10 WHIP. I mean, he's not a pitcher to where he's not throwing 97, 98, 99 to where you're more at risk of having like a serious arm injury. But I guess, again, with his previous health concerns, you just don't know. That's something to take into account, and hopefully he remains healthy. I mean, I want every player to remain healthy, but especially someone who has had heart troubles in the past. Like, I'm hoping he's able to remain healthy. And obviously, I think there's a large truth to the family thing just because of what he turned down and what he's gone through in the past. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I don't think he's going to catch criticism for wanting to stay with his family. I mean, family matters to a lot more to people than to others, and to him it matters a lot, and that's perfectly acceptable.
Yep. And credit to the Dodgers as well, because they, like Friedman said as well, he pretty much said the same thing, like, hey, we'd love to have him, we wanted to trade for him for a reason, basically, but I can't sit here and knock the guy for wanting to stay close to his family, was basically what he said, which 100% true. And as far as numbers go, Eduardo Rodriguez does have the advantage of getting to pitch in the AL Central, which does help his,
That's fair.
his numbers as well.
That's fair.
And then kind of moving on from Eduardo and moving on to like the deadline as a whole, we saw the deadline come and go, and we did not see a lot of action aside from the Mets moving off some big name guys like Verlander, like Scherzer. at this point, the Mets have been talked about until, because they're the only people who did anything. So they've been a large point of conversation. But I guess I just want to start with, why do you think there were so few moves? Why do you think this was such a quiet deadline?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it just in general was a depreciated market in terms of like just position players who were either they were on expirings or had 1 year left to control. I mean, I think just based on the stand, like if you just look at the standings, there's a lot of teams who they're either like 2 games out of the final wild card spot or 3 games out or 4 games out. And with this extra wild card spot, even though a lot of the teams would still be similar in their playoff race anyways, it's still like they can talk themselves into buying. And I think we've seen more of that over the last few seasons when they implemented, because they implemented, I think, the third wildcard spot last year. And of course, in 2020, they had the weird playoff system where like over half the league was making the playoffs. And so it's funky at the deadline when you have when it because it's a buyer's market. Like it's funky when you have the majority, like you have 2/3 of the league who can talk themselves into a playoff spot, and you have a third of the league who they're sellers or they're not as close. But then again, like you have the bottom tier teams like the Athletics, like the Rockies, and they're teams who don't have a lot of tradable pieces because they don't have like great assets. I mean, it's really like the assets we're talking about that are valuable assets that aren't moved are like the Tim Andersons because he has a pedigree, like the Dylan Ceases who have a pedigree, and the Rockies or the Athletics or the Nationals outside of Heimer Candelario who got traded to the Cubs. Like these guys don't have pedigrees, and so you can eliminate like those bottom feeder teams because it's like they don't have much to begin with anyways, unless if you're talking about like a young closer who has a couple more years left to control, or like a starting pitcher who has a couple more years left to control, like guys who are valuable pieces. Other than that, you're looking at like probably 5 or 6 teams really who have tradable pieces who are willing to sell. And the Mets, I guess, were one of those teams. And like, it wasn't even just them. Like, I was surprised the Padres didn't sell, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, they had their best month of the season in July, but I think they were like a handful of games back before the deadline. But like they have pieces like a Juan Soto who has a year left to control. They have Josh Hader who you could sell high on. You could sell high on Blake Snell if you want to. Like there's guys to sell high on while remaining competitive. And it's like their payroll is insane. I don't think they're going to be paying all of those guys when their contracts are up or when it's time to pay them. Like it's just I don't think that's the case. And so you have a chance to sell high, and you're X amount of games below 500 and X amount of games out of the playoff chase. Like there's a small amount of teams who have a lot of tradable assets who have tradable assets who could look themselves in the mirror and be like, we're willing to sell. Other teams like the Yankees, for example, I'll use them because they're my favorite team. They're the team behind me. They were 3.5 games out of the wild card spot, and they talked themselves into. They didn't even buy. They really didn't do anything, but they didn't talk themselves into selling. And that's kind of like what we're talking about here. It's like they didn't really pick a direction, but like there's not a lot of teams who, if they're on the brink, they're willing to sell, especially if you're a big market team. I mean, the Mets were the exception, but they were like 6 or 7 out of the wild card spot. They weren't close. If they were 4 games out or 3 games out, we'd be having a different conversation. They probably wouldn't have made the moves that they made. And so you have a small confinement of teams who have a lot of tradable assets, and you have 2/3 of the league willing to pick from that apple tree.
Yeah. And there's also like a lot of the teams that were buyers, like let's use the Orioles, for example, not a big market team, probably aren't over interested in giving up their, better prospects. The Orioles obviously have a great farm system. So they probably could have went out there and made a big splash and got a big name player just based off the assets that they have in their farm system. But just where they're at as a franchise, it doesn't really make much sense in the long term to go out there and trade a lot of your, elite prospects or even some of your prospects that are, closer to the 8, 10 spot in your farm system. It doesn't really make much sense to go out there and get someone that's a 1 year rental who can help you win and you're not going to be able to keep. Obviously, they went out and got Jack Flaherty, so they didn't do nothing. But that Jack Flaherty wasn't, the number one starting pitcher on the market. So
Right.
you could say the same for the Diamondbacks as well. You don't want to completely, throw away all your prospects and go out there and get players that you have to sign a big contract for. So when you have these small market teams that are in the buyer's market as well, that kind of limits some of what you're going to have. As those teams are also traditionally sellers, so it does take sellers off the market as well. And you have some of these smaller market teams that, aren't in a position to go out there and buy these massive, massive players that would make for an exciting trade deadline. It just wouldn't be a smart thing to do from a long-term team building perspective. Because once again, going back to the Orioles, let's say they, have a fine season, make the playoffs, get bounced in the first round. That's not an awful year for them for where they're at, because
Yeah,
they
I mean, no
still
one expected them to get to where they're at.
exactly they
No one
still have
expected them to be first place.
yeah, and they still have a great future. So you don't have to bargain that future what you have next year so that you can win an extra series or win a couple more playoff games this year. Obviously, you want to win when the window is open, but you also have to recognize that this is the first time the window's been open. It's going to be open for a minute. So we don't
And
need to go out here and act desperate.
I'll throw in two other teams as an example. These aren't like small market teams. These are mid market / big market teams who haven't historically bought or not haven't historically bought, but like under these new ownerships, they haven't got like they're like the big fish, and that's Boston and San Francisco. Like Boston's run by Chaim Bloom. Chaim Bloom, I don't think is like a terrible general manager, but he did come from the Rays, and so he's used to making the minor moves in hope to having a substantial improvement. I mean, he did trade for Kyle Schwarber a couple of deadlines ago. He did sign Masataka Yoshida to nearly $100 million in the offseason from Japan, and that drew a lot of questions around baseball because no one really knew if that would translate. And it so far has. He's probably the AL Rookie of the Year, at least in contention at this point. And then San Francisco's another team. I mean, they did almost throw a gajillion dollars at Carlos Correa, and they did almost throw a gajillion dollars at Aaron Judge, but they haven't gotten like their guy yet. For like they don't have a guy that they've gotten for 150, 200 plus million, like a typical big market or at least a high mid-market franchise would. And both of those teams are in playoff contention, and they kind of stood pat. I mean, the Red Sox got Luis Urias, who hit 145 and was in AAA for a portion of the season. Like the Giants traded for AJ Pollock, who I barely knew was still in the league. And so like they didn't make any big moves. And it's like, I guess those are bad examples, or not bad examples, but because they're bigger market teams, but they don't have a track record of like buying their guys from another franchise. Like they don't have a track record of like, I'm signing this guy to 250 million who wasn't on my friend. Like the Red Sox they did sign Rafael Devers, but they also did trade Mookie Betts and JD Martinez. Or no, did they trade JD or did he sign? I'm trying to remember if they traded him or did he sign him. I think he was a free agent. He opted out. Never mind. But they did, like under this new leadership. I mean, the Giants are ran from Farhan Zaidi, and I remember like I do have Giants friends who are like, when are we going to get like our guy, like the guy that we signed to this massive contract who is a top 15, top 20, 25, whatever player. And it's like, no, instead they've made moves around the fringes, and so is Boston. Like, I don't think either of those teams are necessarily bad teams, but like they haven't made like the big splash. They haven't gotten their whale, I guess, so to speak, yet. And whether it's via the trade market, whether it's signing them in free agency outside of their homegrown prospects, like they haven't necessarily done that yet. And I don't know if they're going to do that at some point. Maybe they do with this upcoming free agent market. I've talked about this. I don't want to. I remember if it was with Jerry or it was with Becdonis, but I remember saying demographically, Shohei Ohtani to the Giants makes sense because of the media market in San Francisco. I don't know if they're going to do that. I don't know if Shohei is going to do that, or if he's going to go to the Dodgers or whatever. I'm not going to try to predict Shohei Ohtani destinations, but like, it makes sense for him. Is he going to be their guy? What is Boston going to do in free agency? They need to address that rotation. I know there's plenty of rotation arms in free agency that could potentially help them. Are they going to get one or two of those guys to add to their payroll? What exactly are they going to do? Are they going to work around the fringes and sign another like Corey Kluber, who is way past his prime and you're trying to extract whatever you can out of him? Or are you going to get like a Julio Urias or someone of that caliber? Like I guess those are the two teams that come to mind when you mention like the mid-market teams who aren't winning. And both the Giants, I believe, and I know the Red Sox, they do have good farm systems. So they weren't, kind of to your point, they weren't willing to they weren't willing to throw prospects for a player who had half year or a full year or whatever.
Yeah. And it's like you can just go and get that same player in the offseason. You can, instead of right this second, going out of your way and giving up the prospects to sign players, you can just wait 2 months. It doesn't help you this season, obviously, but in the long term, I think especially Hein Bloom is someone who looks in the future. That's kind of his whole MO. So
he's
especially
built up
for
that
him,
farm system really well. It's just he hasn't used it to his advantage yet.
Yep. And maybe he decided, hey, I really like Snell, for example, but I'd rather go attack him in the off season. And that once again is maybe, that's not how you win this year. And it's not how you win this year. There's no maybe in it. That's not how you win this year. You're still a fine baseball team, but you're not going to go out there and win a World Series, without making those moves. But also, is anyone going to be mad at the Giants or Red Sox if they don't win a World Series? Neither of those teams are World Series or bust. So I guess I'm not totally surprised that they opted not to make those moves. So before we kind of move on, the winners and losers is obviously always a big part of the deadline, but give me one winner and one loser from the deadline in your opinion.
I mean, I don't want to choose the obvious when I pick these because it's like just the one winner that comes to mind to me is Houston, because they traded for Verlander. I mean, they did trade away two of their top 5 prospects in their system, but they were willing to get a guy who won 2 Cy Youngs with them, who's won 2 World Series titles with them, who could be the ace of that staff, who's pitched a lot better after he started the season on the injured list due to injury. He's been good the last month and a half, and now he's back with an organization who he's familiar with. And I think that's like a slam dunk move. I mean, it's hard to see them not coming out of the AL. I mean, no disrespect to the Rangers, no disrespect to the Rays or the Orioles, but Houston, I think, is now the favorite because of that move that they made. And I'm saying like that, and I can't discredit the fact that, I mean, Texas did get Max Scherzer. They did get Jordan Montgomery. They did get there was a couple other guys that they got that I'm blanking on, but those are like the two of the biggest guys that they got. And so you were able to address your rotation there, and they were a team that needed more pitching. And so I think they're another team that makes for a fun rivalry on the West Coast in the AL West. But I would say one team that won, and I don't know if they're going to get credit for winning the deadline. I mean, again, they've been talked about a whole lot lately, but I think the Mets. And I think the Mets because they picked a direction. Mm-hmm. And they looked in the mirror, they were honest with themselves. I mean, yeah, they did have a $360 million payroll or whatever it was, but they picked a direction. They ate money. They have the financial resources to eat money, and you're essentially buying prospects when you do that. Mm-hmm. They got a good haul for Justin Verlander. They got a good haul for Max Scherzer. They got a solid haul for David Robertson, who's really struggled in his first 2 appearances with the Marlins. Like, they got a good haul for these guys. And while they might not be pitching prospects and while you might still have to develop them, they're still prospects, and it builds up your farm system. I don't think they're going to be incredibly competitive in 2024, but it sets them up for 2025. But they picked a direction. And to some, it might have been the right direction. To others, it might have been the wrong direction, but they picked a direction. And as a team as a fan of the other New York team, it's a little bit envious that they picked a direction. But like, I think they were really winners in the sense that they traded 2 40 or close to 40-year-old pitchers who were making nearly $100 million, and they were able to get a fairly good prospect haul back for them.
Yeah, I agree with both of those teams as teams that won. Like you said, Mets, you pick a direction. You know, the worst place to be in sports is in the middle, not knowing whether
Yep.
to win or lose. It's and they picked a direction, and they got, you know, at least 3 prospects that look to be really, really good prospects. And, you know, their farm system, not the best in the league, but there's some serious young talent in that farm system. And now you can give those guys some time to develop, and your younger players can get you ready for a run in 2025, and you can get some of that old money out the door. Not all of it, obviously, because you're eating some, but by the time 2025 rolls around, you're going to have a decent amount of money off the books. You know, they have quite a few guys on 1-year deals, so the money will be a little bit less of a concern when it comes time for them to win, and then they can go out and make another big move based off which of these young guys plays well, which one of these young guys doesn't play well. So they have a direction, like you said. So that's the number one thing. Houston, like you said, big winner. Rangers had a nice deadline. And all throughout the Phillies as well. Maybe a little bit biased because they really didn't do much aside from pick up Lorenzen. And I have watched Lorenzen pitch all year because I am a Tigers fan. Having a great year. And, you know, they didn't have to give up much for him, but I feel like that's just a small piece that they, you know, picked up that, you know, you look at their rotation now, you have a little bit less concern. Not the biggest move in the world, but, you know, patch a slight hole. And that rotation is already a good rotation with Wheeler, Nola, Ranger Suarez. It's like, it's not a bad rotation at all. And they added another piece to it, so they have a little bit less concern there at the bottom half. So I'll give them some credit as well for going out and getting a guy that they don't really have to invest much in terms of a prospect haul in. And then for losers, I think it's basically just teams that could have done something that did nothing, like your Twins. I mean, you can throw the Yankees out there as well as a team.
The Yankees are a loser. They're a loser.
I feel bad because
Without
you have to talk about the Yankees on like every single daily show, and it's at this point in the year, it's never positive. But you know, they're a team that didn't pick a direction, and that's not great. And now you're gonna go out there and try and make the playoffs, I guess, this year. You're gonna try and squeeze in a wild card spot with a roster that probably doesn't have, you know, the talent, especially on the hitting side of things. So, and that's saying it nicely. So those would be my 2 losers, just teams that could have done something or have done more that did absolutely nothing.
I think I agree with that. There's a couple other like winners and losers that I want to point out. I did like what I saw from the Brewers at the deadline. I mean, they're not big acquisitions getting Mark Canha and Carlos Santana, but especially in Santana's case, like they were so desperate for first base production. And especially since Rowdy Tellez broke his arm in early, I think it was like mid-July. He broke his arm out 6 to 8 weeks, or at least around that timetable. They get Carlos Santana, who, I mean, yeah, he is 36, 37. He's at the back end of his career, but he's a solid defender. And he gives you some sort of like switch hitting production from that spot. And they were in desperate need of offense, especially from that position itself. And then just addressing the corner outfielder spot with Mark Canha. Mark Canha is just like a solid baseball player. I think he's having probably a little bit of a down season with the Mets. Maybe a change of scenery helps him out. But then they also got Andrew Chafin from the Diamondbacks. And it just, like, again, helps lengthen the bullpen a little bit for them. And I know Chafin's had a little bit of a rougher season as well. But I kind of like what they did. And then in the other Central, a loser that I had was the Guardians. And it was weird to me because it's like Shane Bieber's now just got placed on the IL, but then they're just a couple games out of the division race, and they traded Aaron Savali away. They traded Ahmed Rosario, who's having a disastrous season, but they got Noah Syndergaard in return. So it's like it's a really just a nothing burger. And it was just a confusing thing to me because it's like you're so close. I mean, the Guardians are a team that doesn't want to spend money. I get it, but like they're still you can still make like you can still make beneficial acquisitions to your roster without having to spend an exorbitant amount of money, especially when your best arm is now on the IL and probably won't be returning for a little while. And so to me, that it was just a confusing deadline for them. They're a team like the Twins who need offense. And it was the fact that they were willing to sell the Guardians. I mean, the fact that they were willing to sell it's just a little confusing to me, or at least they were willing to sell off pieces. Like I don't think they got a whole lot back for Savali, if I can remember correctly. Maybe they did, but it was just a weird direction to me. I mean, another like winner, I guess just to throw one more out there is probably I like what the Marlins did. And Josh Bell and Jake Verker could be huge difference makers in that lineup, and then we saw it last night in their extra innings victory over the Phillies. I mean, David Robertson struggled, but I think at some point he has a track record of figuring it out. And so I expect him to at some point, at least at the back end of that bullpen. But I kind of like what they did. I think Kim Ang did a lot to probably try to save her job as GM. And I don't know. I'm guessing it will work out at some point. I mean, the Braves are so far ahead of them in the division that they're not going to catch them, but it's just competing for the wild card spot, which they're right in the thick of that race. And then another loser, I'd probably say, is the Giants. And for what I previously mentioned, I mean, the Giants don't have to. They're still 2 games up on the final wild card spot. They're not in like a dire need to make a move, but they were the worst offense in July after being one of the best offenses in June. And I mean, their pitching staff has been incredible, so I credit to them for that. But just a couple more winners and losers that may not get talked about as much as these other ones.
Yeah, I will. I will throw out one more on each. Credit to the Angels for picking a direction. You keep Ohtani, so you add pieces around him. Credit for that. You know, maybe it doesn't work out at the end of the day, but you picked a direction, and that's something that we've talked about a lot already today. Something I respect. Loser, Khalil Watson, used to be one of the top prospects, and a highly touted prospect, and now you're getting shipped at the deadline. So not great for him. I can't imagine that was a great feeling considering where he was once thought of as a solid prospect and a guy that would turn out. I'm not sure that necessarily holds true today. So he was a loser at the deadline, not a team, and not trying to pile on him, but
one more loser was the fans.
Grace. Yeah.
The fans, because it was a pretty boring deadline, if I'm being completely honest. Baseball deadline's one of the more active ones. At least I feel like in terms of like big moves. I mean, last we saw Juan Soto trade. We've seen big moves historically in the past, but it just felt like this year it was a little bit like, okay, there was a couple maybe big moves with Verlander and Scherzer, but other than that, it was like Lucas Giolito was a fun move. I mean, of course, we saw the buzzer beaters with like Flaherty and like Scott Barlow, who was a reliever for the Royals. Like, just like smaller moves. I mean, I wish there would have been like more splashes, but again, as we talked about a little bit earlier, it was a buyer's market, and there wasn't a lot of teams who had a lot of tradable assets who were willing to sell at least.
Yep, and I was watching the Daily Show trade deadline special, and it was a lot of make a move,
boring.
Come on, someone make a move. But moving on here, some relatively big news in college athletics, I guess in general, kind of more centered around football, but it did kind of spill over to some other sports. Iowa and Iowa State Mainly Iowa State being the big one, but there was some little sprinkles in of Iowa. Big gambling investigation unveiled that they've had players betting on university sports. Obviously, never great. Biggest name of the group, quarterback Hunter Deckens. He was betting on games, and the best part is, in my opinion at least, is it was a lot of 20-year-olds betting money in with sportsbook accounts that were belonged to their parents. So their parents actively facilitated their like losing of college eligibility, where the parents were like, "Yeah, go ahead, sign up and bet on games with my." Maybe that wasn't the actual conversation. Maybe they thought they were betting on something different, but that's a big no-no. Is betting under a different person's name. That's what they were doing to bet
It's
on.
illegal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When
It's
I'm saying
illegal to it's illegal to knowingly accomplice
yeah,
someone who's under the age of 21 to bet.
yeah.
It's a crime.
And then you throw on they're betting on sporting events that they're not allowed to bet because they're underage. But if they were of age, they wouldn't even be able to bet on those sports
Right.
because they do go to the university and they play sports at said university. We had, I in fairness to them, not a lot of betting on games that they're playing in, which I guess is some sort of credit. Which in a
I don't think there's much credit to go around here.
no. I mean, like, at least it wasn't just all money getting poured in games they were playing in. It's a sigh of relief, I guess, but still very, very bad. I'm not trying to make light of it, but if you're gonna bet, don't bet on sports you're actively participating in.
Yeah, no, I got some numbers here for you.
Yeah, let's hear the numbers. I was reading through the numbers, and they are funny.
Yeah, so I got this from Sports Illustrated, so I don't remember who the writer was, but this was per Sports Illustrated, just based on the reports that have been surfaced. But over 5,100 bets were made across, and these are across 7 athletes, and I know they looked at like over 100 people. They looked at like 25 athletes. They looked at one like staffer, and so they kind of investigated. It was a lot of people within both Iowa and Iowa State. But just per these reports, over 5,100 bets were made, which equated to nearly $115,000 just in total amount. And so like if you, with the average bet, it's like probably $21, $22, $23 per bet. Over 1,000 of these bets reportedly were made before these athletes were 21. And so you're talking about like a fourth of these bets, or a fifth of these bets were made before they're 21. From what the numbers I got 70 on Iowa's sporting events, like to some extent. And then plus like the NFL player, I think had like 32 or somewhere around there for like Broncos wagers. But we're talking about like, this is probably, I don't know how you stop something like this, like just for like the future. Because again, if it's just these 7 athletes who were charged with this, and they were charged over the weekend, I don't know if there's going to be more that get disclosed among these 25, 26 athletes, however many there were. But this is just insane because it's like, I don't know. We talk about the parents being involved and like they're using it under their account. Are we sure the parents are accomplices? Or because I have no idea, because again, it's illegal to willingly do this or willingly accomplice or like sign these athletes or student athletes up below the age of 21 for betting accounts, like under their name. Like it looks like they're just trying to manipulate transactions and manipulate like their identity so they can make these bets. And so that I have a lot of questions about this, because it's like we're now in the age of sports gambling where it's becoming more rampant. I mean, there have been, dating back to like early 20th century, there have been like gambling cases where like players are trying to shave points for financial gain. And it's like, when you think about why kids are doing this, I mean, obviously before like 2020, 2021, like since some of these athletes have been doing this was like before NIL, or like right around when NIL was becoming a thing. And when you're talking about someone who is like a baseball player or someone who is like a wrestler, they're not making as much NIL money, or they're not getting enough NIL sponsorships compared to like the star quarterback on the football team or someone on the basketball team. Like they're getting lower. It also depends on the school and the market that you're in, but you're getting lower level sponsorships or partnerships with these certain companies. And it's like, these are just dumb college kids who are 20 years old and they have no reputable source of income. And so what's the first? Oh, gambling. Oh, I could sign up for DraftKings or FanDuel because it's now legal in my state, because it just became legal for them like a few years ago. And so it's like, now that it's legal in my state, oh, let's make some extra money on the side. Oh, let's use my parents' identity because, again, they were really thinking. I don't really think I can come up with the reason you do it, but they're trying to get some sort of money. And the fact that it's even funnier that they're doing it like on their own events. Like I remember I saw one where like it was like the backup kicker for Iowa. He bet the under for Iowa State, and they missed a field goal at the end of regulation for it was like a 45-point total, and it finished at 44. And I'm sure that backup kicker was happy as hell, but at the same time, it's just like, what?
I will say, I was reading the ESPN report, and there was a paragraph in there where they were talking about the Iowa kicker, and it was he bet the under 45 or under 45 and a half points. The game ended in whatever score, and the bet successfully hit. And I got a nice little chuckle out of that. Because some of it's just reading it through, being like, this player bet this much money, this many bets. And then for them to be like, well, he had this bet on this specific game, and it hit. It's just absolutely insane. And it's funny to like read at and look at it, just how wild it is. It's also not funny because it is, college kids that are throwing away their sporting careers. So you're kind of playing with both sides of that. And to your point about the parents, I really hope it's kids who are using their parents' identity and not parents who are facilitating it. Obviously,
I wish it was neither, but
yeah. But I hope parents aren't like willingly allowing their children to do that, because it's so because you have to use your name. I believe, I don't remember all the steps to sign up, but you have to use your name, and your location is tracked when you're using it to ensure you're in a spot where you're eligible to bet. So it's like, oh, wow, there's a lot of bets being placed with the last name Deckens from the University of Iowa State campus. That looks awfully suspicious. It's like, it's not that hard to, get to the bottom of this and go, I think something illegal is going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I find that interesting because, like, for me, I'm 23. I live in Nevada. DraftKings and FanDuel aren't legal in the state yet, so I use a different sportsbook. I'm not going to name what sportsbook because I don't like it that much. But what I had to do is I had to sign up at a kiosk, and like when I had to sign up is like I had to use identification for it, and so maybe there is like the kids like stole ID. Like you have to use like an ID. I used identification. I think I had to get my picture taken to make sure like my face recognition, it was close to what it was on my driver's license. And obviously you have to insert money or whatever. Like there was like certain steps that I had to do to complete my registration for when I first signed up. And so it's like an entire process. And so maybe there was some sort of like the parents are accomplices. Again, I don't necessarily know how DraftKings or FanDuel works with terms of like signing up. Like I had to sign up at a kiosk. That was like that for the sportsbook that I signed up for. That's like a rule. Like that's like something that you have to do. And there's kiosks for the sportsbook all around my area. And obviously, like if you go to Vegas, like if you want to sign up for like BetMGM or whatever, then you could. There's different casinos and stuff there that allow that. So obviously, again, I don't know the process for that either, but there's different ways, I guess, for different sports books where you can sign up, whether it's online or whether it's in person at a kiosk or at a stand or whatever. And so I think it's just different for certain ones. But so maybe I'm not sure. Like maybe are you able to sign up with like FanDuel or DraftKings like online? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah, you just do it. Right,
so then maybe there was a way where it's like these parents weren't accomplices and these kids were just like stealing their parents' identity, which is obviously wrong. Like
Yeah.
that's never something that you should do. Or maybe their parents were involved in it. I mean, I think it was for decades. It was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he had two separate accounts with his mom and dad, or is it
Ooh.
just one of his two parents?
I didn't know that he had a separate account with his dad, but they in the one
I
of the
think it was
articles
both
I
of them. I
read.
think I saw both of them, but maybe it's just one of them. Either way, it's still wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And also the other thing that there was a video that surfaced of
Yeah,
Deckins. Do you see that video? That was
yeah.
crazy. He was at a bar, definitely, absolutely hammered. He was at a bar and he was making a bet with what I assume. I don't know if it was the bartender. It might have just been someone who, another girl who was there. But she has a camera directly in his face, like 3 inches from his face, and she's got the camera right in his face. And he's like, "I will bet you $500 we win." And she like points at the Iowa State on his shirt and is like, "You're betting me?" And he's like, $500. They shake on it. Then she puts the camera down. It doesn't stop recording, and he goes, "Don't post that. That's not illegal. Like I'm not supposed to do that." And it is absolutely insane that is like it very damning considering everything else that went on today, which was not exactly what I was expecting to see on Twitter this morning.
I don't remember what athlete it was, but like someone made like over 40 grand
I didn't know that.
with like in this investigation. I'm going to see if I can find it who it was, but like I don't remember how many bets it was, but it was like 1,000 bets or like 2,000 bets, and kid won like 40 grand. It was just like, wait.
Oh my god, it's a lot
Like,
easier to win money betting when you know the game plan. I will say that. If you know who's getting the red zone,
yeah.
if you know who's getting the red zone carries, it's a lot easier to pick who's going to score the first touchdown.
My question is, it's like, I wonder what their. I mean, this is just like a random gambling question because it's like me. I bet I'm a degenerate. I'm stupid, but it's also I don't bet a lot of money on games. Like I've talked to Trey about this before. Like I'll bet like $2 to $3 on something. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, that's what I do.
I'm not gonna bet like 15. I'm not gonna bet like $150 on something. Like I'm not gonna. That's just not who I am. And I think I've become smarter and more cautious over time because it's just like trial by fire. And like my dad and stuff laugh at me when I tell him like this is what I did. Like I bet $4 on this, and he's just like, "That's a terrible bet. What are you doing? You lost it because you're an idiot." So I mean, I wonder what the starting amount for these kids were like. Were they just where'd they get $200, $300?
Also, we talked about
like
NIL earlier. Like, if you're making money off NIL and you want to make more, it's like there is a chance that some of these guys had actual like real serious money to bet with because
possibly, yeah,
they were putting NIL money into it, which that's obviously highly speculative of me to say that, but there is a reasonable path of going from NIL money to betting with NIL money.
I got it. Panera Johnson, Iowa State wrestler since 2022, 1,283 bets, $45,640 earned, or at least that the total. Okay, maybe not earned, but total over 45K.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so, I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting. Like, I don't think that's earned, but regardless. Whether you earn 45K or you're betting 45K.
Those are big numbers.
Still a lot of money.
And for him, like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And then 45K
is a lot of money for a college wrestler.
Yeah.
No bueno.
Oh my goodness.
The last thing I'll add here is the one guy who got in trouble did it at Iowa State and then did it again in the NFL. The player that got drafted to the Broncos. I believe he was already suspended indefinitely for betting on Broncos games, but he's also involved in this. And I believe he's, there was some criminal charges as well for all these guys because there was some tampering with evidence type thing, or I believe I don't remember the actual term, but they were falsifying records or something along those lines. So he's getting additional, but for him to do it at Iowa State and then turn around and do it with the Broncos, crazy that you went from, I was doing it in college to I'll do it in the league now. crazy that we went from point A to point B and did it in both spots.
It's also interesting because I heard McAfee bring up this point when he talked about it yesterday. Most of these kids, like, I mean, I mean, again, this isn't like a justification for it, but since the majority of these kids like have no idea what they're going to do with these lives, like, majority of these kids aren't going to make it to the NFL, or they're not going to make it to the NBA or Major League Baseball or whatever like professional league that they have in their sport. And so, again, this is just a way for like how much. I mean, obviously they're throwing away their collegiate sports career and they're being criminally charged with this, which is obviously bad, but in their silly little minds, it's okay, I'm not going to make professional, like, what's a way to like make some money on the side while I'm in college? And again, it's not smart. There's really no justification for it, but like, at least in 6 of the 7 of these athletes' case, like, they're not going to make professional sports, or at least they're not expected to make a professional league. And so, again, I don't know how you stop something like this from happening in the future, because it's like, again, it's obviously what could happen to these 7 athletes could, whether it's like prison time or whatever it is, like suspensions. It could, there's a world where it scares certain athletes from betting before they're 21 and betting when they're in college. But again, like, they're college kids. And so I'm not saying that they should be doing this, but it's like college kids are going to make some dumb decision that could fracture their future. So I don't know how much it's going to scare them off. Should they do this? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it's like, again, we're now in the age where sports gambling is becoming more legal across the country. There have been scandals in the past about people shaving points or whatever. Like, this is probably the biggest one that I can think of, at least in recent memory. Mm-hmm. And I just don't know like how exactly you stop something like this from happening in the future when it starts becoming more legal in every state, and when more of these sports start becoming legal in every state. I feel like we're going to be seeing more of something like this happening. I hope not, but like, some college kids are just idiots and they don't think. And so it's like, I don't really know if they're going to stop and think about like, oh, so-and-so from Iowa State did it and got in trouble. Like, I don't think they're going to think about that, honestly. And so I don't know what the way to stop this is. And that's like, I hope for the sake of them, this is like a lesson to student athletes around America, or people who are potentially going to become student athletes. But I don't know, man.
Yeah. And a couple points just off the back of what you said, like, in terms of like marketing for sports betting, they market like to college kids. It's like, there's a reason that they market to college kids. They don't do it by accident. You know, they want college kids to bet. It's the same exact reason that credit card companies want college kids to get credit cards. It's like, there's a reason that they market to that specific demographic. So, because that demographic is more susceptible. So, and, you know, another thing to remember here is the U.S. judicial system absolutely stumbled all over my words saying that. But regardless, they don't exactly take kindly to mixing sports that you're playing in with betting on said sports. You know, just with the history of the United States and looking back at, you know, major scandals in sports and revolving around betting, whether it be the White Sox all the way back. That's probably over 100 years ago now. Whether it be Pete Rose, you know, don't take kindly to those type of things, just like they don't like steroids in sports either. With steroids,
you can get thrown in prison for this stuff.
Yeah. Yes. So the U.S. does not like this from the courts do not. So that's another thing to remember for anyone that's doing this. And like you said, I can't imagine, you know, 5 years from now, you know, there's going to be a player that goes, well, I shouldn't do that because Hunter Deckins got busted for it 5 years ago. Like this, unfortunately, as unfortunate as it is, probably not the last time that we're going to see this.
Yeah.
And we're sitting at an hour now. We had a couple other sports that topics that we were aiming to talk about, but you and I think we both like to get a little long-winded sometimes. So we are at the hour mark. So unless you want to briefly touch on anything else before we get out of here, I think we're good to shut it down. But if there's anything that you want to briefly touch on before we shut it down, just say so.
I mean, nothing brief now that I can
Okay.
think of.
Then thank you to everyone who tuned into the Daily Show. It's always fun talking to you, Matt. I feel like we don't do this as much as I feel like I'm on with other people more, which is fine because that's how it works out. But always good to sit down and talk to you for an hour. So I had a good time.
Likewise.
All right, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. Make sure you like, subscribe to Vendetta Sports Media on YouTube, and go check out the website vendettasportsmedia.com or read the site on Newsbreak and follow us there as well. So thank you to everyone, and the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show will be back tomorrow.